doors today after a day-long public hearing in which he called the president a chronic cheat and lawbreaker whose crimes continue in the White House. Plus, the summit the president promised would be tremendous is instead a giant disappointment. The president fails to win big concessions from Kim Jong-un, and he gives the brutal dictator a pass when asked about an American who died just after being released from a North Korean prison. And there's more to sour the president's mood. The government says economic growth slowed in the final quarter of 2018 as the impact of the Trump tax cuts faded.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to get on a plane and fly back to a wonderful place called Washington, D.C. So thank you very much. Thank you, fellas. Thank you very much.
And we begin the hour with that long flight home and the reality check waiting for the president here in what he calls this wonderful place. The deal he wanted, he doesn't have. The investigations he wants to go away are instead blossoming new leads. The president this hour heading back to the United States empty-handed. The summit he said would be tremendous, instead, a major disappointment.
We just left Chairman Kim. We had a really, I think, a very productive time. We thought, and I thought, and Secretary Pompeo felt that it wasn't a good thing to be signing anything. We had some options, and at this time we decided not to do any of the options, and we'll see where that goes. But it was a very interesting 2 days, and I think actually it was a very productive 2 days, but sometimes you have to walk, and this was just one of those times.
No deal with Kim Jong-un, and now shade from his former ambassador to the United Nations. She's not happy. The president gave Kim a pass for the brutal treatment of American Otto Warmbier. And the president arrives home to some impeachment rumblings, rippling from Michael Cohen's 5-hour public testimony.
I think having a fake hearing like that and having it in the middle of this very important summit is really a terrible thing. He lied a lot, but it was very interesting because he didn't lie about one thing. He said no collusion with the Russian hoax. And I said, I wonder why he didn't just lie about that, too, like he did about everything else.
What the president calls Cohen's lies, Democrats call new reasons to investigate the president, his business, and his innermost circles. CNN's Caitlin Collins is still in Hanoi. Caitlin, the president thought this would be a very big week. It's been something very different.
It certainly has been very different. And, John, he wasn't expecting to make that 8,000-mile trip home empty-handed, but he is tonight, and there is no third summit on the horizon right now. Now, John, to give you a sense of just how quickly things unfolded yesterday, the White House had already sent out the lunch menu for President Trump and Kim Jong-un, detailing what they were going to be eating. That's a lunch that didn't happen, and neither did that joint signing ceremony that some aides wondered why the White House had put on the schedule in the first place, because, of course, things are fluid when you're negotiating with the North Korean dictator, and that's something that never came to fruition because of what the president said was a demand from Kim Jong-un that they lift all sanctions immediately. Now, aides had warned the president beforehand that in the talks leading up to the summit here in Hanoi, John, the North Koreans had been pretty stubborn about wanting to get those sanctions lifted. But the president was under the impression that he could come here, he could convince Kim Jong-un otherwise, make some kind of concessions with them other than that. But when they got in the room, Kim Jong-un made sure that he still wanted to get those sanctions lifted. And that's why ultimately the president is walking away from this. As he said, he feels that's a better deal for him. Now, some aides are actually privately signing some relief right now because they thought that there was a concern that the president could get in the room with Kim Jong-un and potentially make some major concessions they were worried about. So they actually feel pretty good, John, about where things have ended. But whether or not the president feels that way is another question.
It's another big question. Caitlin Collins live in Hanoi. Appreciate the reporting throughout the summit. With me here in studio to share the reporting and their insights, CNN's Nia Malika Henderson, Michael Scher with the New York Times, Carl Hulse, also with the Times, and Sungmin Kim of the Washington Post. The president wanted pageantry. He wanted a deal. He's coming home, and it's an interesting moment in the sense that he doesn't have a big deliverable to say, I told you so. The power of my personality would get North Korea to do something it has been unwilling to do for a generation. Failed there. And he comes home to a climate here where Democrats are showing their muscle with investigations. And if Michael Cohen is to believe, the Southern District of New York is digging deeper and deeper into the president's family and company.
I mean, look, there's two things that this sort of is striking about. One is that the president has invested since the beginning of his presidency when it comes to foreign leaders. He's invested everything in personal relationships as opposed to the interests of countries that usually dictate the kinds of policies that a president pursues. So that with allies, he did things that broke with the usual kinds of interests that connect the United States to its allies, because he didn't have good relationships with their leaders, and he invested everything in the relationships with these sort of dictators around the world. And this is what you find is, at the end of the day, the relationship isn't everything, that there really are interests that are competing in North Korea and in the United States, and that undermines it. And then when he comes back to the United States, you realize that he can't just will. There are certain things that you can't just will reality to be what you want it to be. And in both of these cases, whether it's trying to sort of, through the force of your personality and charisma, decide that the relationship between the United States and North Korea is going to be different than it's been for decades, or whether it's coming back to Washington and realizing that the situation about these investigations is actually going on and you just can't stop it.
And the relationship did not get him a deal with Kim, number one. But there's a relationship, does the president putting the value in the relationship, does it warp his thinking sometimes, in the sense that this is the president talking about, is Kim Jong-un responsible for what happened to Otto Warmbier? Young American, imprisoned in North Korea, held for a long time, released only when the North Koreans realized his health was failing precipitously, dies shortly thereafter. Kim Jong-un is a dictator. He runs the show, meaning he runs everything in North Korea. The president says this.
I don't believe that he would have allowed that to happen. It just wasn't to his advantage to allow that to happen. He felt very badly. He knew the case very well, but he knew it later. He tells me that he didn't know about it, and I will take him at his word.
I will take him at his word. That's shocking. An American president, not in North Korea, but overseas, essentially saying, I accept the words of the dictator. How shocking is it? This is Nikki Haley, loyal UN ambassador for President Donald J. Trump, who left the administration not that long ago, tweeting last hour, Americans know the cruelty that was placed on Otto Warmbier by the North Korean regime. Our hearts are with the Warmbier family for their strength and courage. We will never forget Otto. Yeah. That's a rare slapback.
Yeah. And she's echoing something that Donald Trump himself said at the State of the Union. I don't think it was last year, but it was the year before. The Warmbier family was there. He basically said, our thoughts and prayers are with you, and talked about the North Korean dictatorship sending Otto Warmbier to a prison. And we know what North Korean prisons are like. Donald Trump basically thinks that Kim Jong-un is like him, in the sense that Kim Jong-un will respond to flattery. So there he is, basically saying all sorts of nice things about this North Korean dictator, and thinking that he's going to change his mind, thinking that he's going to relinquish something that his country has worked decades to achieve, these nuclear weapons, which obviously keep the regime in place, keep him on the world stage. And if you're Donald Trump, you think that somehow, these love letters that they sent back and forth will change the calculus. But obviously he's learning that's not the case.
And it's a pattern that you've seen from this president several times now. I mean, not just with the North Korean dictator, but also with Putin himself, the Russian president, Mohammed bin Salman, and in these similar circumstances. And I was looking back at what the president had said about Otto Warmbier. I mean, back in 2017, he also called this the responsibility of a brutal regime. And I think that why he's doing this is unclear. I was talking with Senator Lindsey Graham this morning about this and why he might just take Kim Jong-un at his word. Graham thinks it might be kind of a negotiating tactic to kind of leave him space for future talks. But regardless, this is something that Republicans will have to address when we speak to him later today.
It's a slap in the face to an American family who lost their son. That's what it is from the President of the United States. Let's talk about the climate. He's come back home. The President says he watched as much as he could, of the Michael Cohen testimony. I suspect on that flight home, he's going to get caught up, not only in the testimony, but on the media coverage of it. Media coverage which says the Democrats are going to call more witnesses and investigate more things. If Michael Cohen is to be believed, the Southern District of New York not only is investigating things we know about, like the Trump Organization, the Trump inauguration, but something else. Michael Cohen said he was not at liberty to discuss. Let's listen to a little bit of the questioning here from Democrats, a couple of the key Democrats here who if you listen here, you see, number one, the president's in some legal peril. Number two, the Democrats are going to go from the Cohen hearing into it seeking additional witnesses and testimony.
Is there any other wrongdoing or illegal act that you are aware of regarding Donald Trump that we haven't yet discussed today?
Yes, and again, those are part of the investigation that's currently being looked at by the Southern District of New York.
To your knowledge, did the president ever provide inflated assets to an insurance company?
Yes.
And where would the committee find more information on this? Do you think we need to review his financial statements and his tax returns in order to compare them?
Yes, and you'd find it at the Trump org.
Where do we go from here? In part, the Republican praise of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tells you everything you need to know. Some impressive questioning there, essentially trying to find where else should we look here? What onion? How should we peel this onion back?
The president, I think, called that a fake hearing. That was a very real hearing. Yeah. I mean, that is as real as it gets on Capitol Hill. That was a big moment. And I think what you're going to see the Democrats now, and I think Nancy Pelosi was already this morning backing away from impeachment, they're going to investigate. They are going to pull these threads on all this, and it's going to go on for a long time. I still think that the Republicans haven't quite come to grips with the fact that they're in the minority in the House. They were not prepared for that hearing yesterday in any way. And there was a lot that came out, and I think the president is over there and watching this. I think they seem to be caught off guard by how aggressive Michael Cohen was. I actually kind of want to give the president props in some way for not making a deal over there, because I think we all anticipated that he was so eager to do something to take attention away from that, and I actually was kind of surprised that they backed away.
We'll continue the conversations to go through the hour. Up next, did Michael Cohen's testimony put the country on the road to impeachment? Depends who you ask. For day 3 of testimony, the House Intelligence Committee getting its chance to grill the president's former lawyer and fixer behind closed doors. Cohen's public testimony yesterday, if accurate, suggests the feds in New York are very, very busy and that the president faces long-term legal peril. The immediate political fallout here in Washington includes impeachment rumblings. Here's Congressman Carolyn Maloney of New York.
We'll follow the facts where they take us. I think it possibly could lead to impeachment.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi says slow down. She says such talk is premature until Congress can dig deeper and until the special counsel completes his work.
Would that be an impeachable offense?
Well, I'm not going into that. We have 2 investigations, the Mueller report that we're all anxiously awaiting, and as was indicated, the one thing I did see widely reported was that the witness said that other issues that he was aware of were under consideration by the Southern District of New York. So let's see what that is. But again, impeachment is a divisive issue in our country.
Not just the words, but the body language there. The body language from the speaker saying, just everybody calm down. Now, the question is, can she convince? It's a modest number of Democrats so far publicly talking about this. But it is something that motivates and animates the Democratic base. Can she keep them in line?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question, because you saw in that hearing the face of this new Congress, and they are very raucous, very, in your face. And a lot of those folks, at least a few of them, have talked about impeachment. So we'll see if she's able to tamp down on that. It does seem like sort of the average Democrats. I mean, if you sort of flash back a year ago, average Democrats, talked about impeachment, sort of the dream of the president not ending not serving out his first full term. It feels like those people, sort of average Democrats, have moved on and sort of realized it's sort of a fantasy. But we'll see what Nancy Pelosi is able to do with this new energy.
Yeah, I think that she has been very clear, and so has Jerry Nadler, been very clear. And he's the Judiciary Committee chairman, and he says, unless we can do something on a bipartisan basis, we're not going to do it. That hearing yesterday was not a bipartisan inquiry, and I think that there's a lot of political benefit to doing these investigations and actually letting the people say we should impeach, but without facing the political consequences of impeaching. I think you're going to see this just play out in these investigations. I'm writing about this for the paper tomorrow to get a plug in.
I will tell you, I talked yesterday to a former chairman of the Oversight Committee, Tom Davis, who was a Republican who chaired that committee for a while, who made the point that sometimes these things get away from you. And
let me read that quote. I have it right here in your article. We'll read you in the paper tomorrow. We read him. We read him in the paper today. Tom Davis, he's a Republican, but here's what he says: the more you do this, it just fires up the base that thinks every day he stays in office it endangers the republic. It's that old thing about be careful what you ask for. Right. Meaning, if the Democrats keep having these hearings, and they say, and they have every right to say, Michael Cohen gave them a lot of material to at least pursue. You can decide whether you believe it or not, but he gave them a lot of leads, and so they say they're going to spend several committees. This will take weeks and months. It's their job, they say. But to Tom Davis's point, then the base starts saying, well, what are you going to do with all this?
Right. I mean, you know, there's a pressure that builds up, and it's possible, as Carl says, that they can just string that along and get it closer and closer and closer to the election. That's probably better for them than actually pulling the trigger in the end, but you don't always control things that well in politics.
Can't discount this as a motivator for the Republican base as well, who can look at the Democrats and say they are overreaching against the president with no actual clear evidence, since impeachment is kind of inherently a political process. And throughout the Democratic majority so far, especially as they've been clamoring to begin investigations against the president, that's what congressional Republicans have been banking on, that they will overreach, and that'll, bite back at them politically.
To that point, you heard this from some of the president's allies at CPAC today, and you hear it from Rush Limbaugh to motivate the saying, look, you've got to stay with the president because the Democrats are trying to impeach him.
This is such a come down for the House of Representatives as led by the Democrat Party. It is pure desperation. And the fact that they are continuing on this objective of impeaching Trump is proof positive to me they expect him to win in 2020 if they don't do something about it.
The part there about this pure desperation. There was a lot. Michael Cohen said a lot. And even the smart Democrats said, we're not sure if we can believe you, but we're going to follow up on this. But to that end, if you watched yesterday, what the Republicans did repeatedly is attack Michael Cohen. A convicted felon, a liar, a cheat, he could not be believed. What they did not do was say the president couldn't have done any of this. The president wouldn't have done any of this. Jim Jordan, one of those attacking Michael Cohen, faced tough scrutiny on Fox News last night.
What about the substance? I mean, the president writing a check to him while president for these payments, these 11 payments, that he says were to pay off Stormy Daniels and the other woman.
He was the personal lawyer for the president and the Trump organization. I don't think that's unusual. My guess is there's all kinds of companies, all kinds of individuals who have a similar type of relationship. That's what was brought out today. And again, where was the new news? There wasn't any new news here.
There was new news here. There was new news here. If the president knew when he cut that check as president to Michael Cohen, it was part of a scam to go end around campaign finance laws. Sorry, Congressman Jordan, that's news. But the fact that they do not want to answer to the specifics, what does that tell you?
Yeah, I think they didn't seem prepared. This is the president and his lawyer.
They didn't seem prepared, or they know they can't go there.
I don't even
because you know
know
this on Capitol Hill. There are a few people like Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows who will defend the president at all count. Most other Republicans, they're afraid of his 85, 90% in their district, but they don't trust or believe him either. But privately, they don't trust or believe him either.
Yeah. Right, but they knew what was coming, and it's to sit there. You have to mount some sort of defense to the actual act, right? And they didn't do that.
But neither is the president, really. I mean, he's essentially saying that Michael Cohen is a lying liar who lies, right? And that's essentially what the Republicans said.
Except for about collusion.
Oh, the collusion.
Yeah. He did tell the truth there. So.
Yeah. Right. Believe him here. Don't believe him anywhere else. The problem with this story is you have a liar testifying about being told to lie by a liar. That's what, yeah. Up next, the president goes out of his way to defend Kim Jong-un.
It's strange, and I don't know. There's something wrong with Putin, Kim Jong-un, in my view, thugs that the president chooses to believe.
We spent pretty much all day with Kim Jong-un, who is he's quite a guy and quite a character, and I think our relationship is very strong. I think we'll end up being very good friends with Chairman Kim and with North Korea. We like each other, good relationship.
Big questions going forward include whether the White House can keep strong international sanctions in place and whether Kim will keep this promise.
He has a certain vision, and it's not exactly our vision, but it's a lot closer than it was a year ago. He's not going to do testing of rockets and nuclear, not going to do testing. So, I trust him, and I take him at his word. I hope that's true.
Rear Admiral John Kirby and David Sanger with the New York Times joined the conversation. They are at the summit site in Hanoi, Vietnam. David, let me start with you. What's your biggest takeaway here? The president leaves empty-handed. Most analysts would say that's the right thing to do, given that Kim was not ready to give more at the table. But now what?
Well, two big takeaways. The first is the president ran into the risks of doing very personal leader-to-leader kind of negotiations here. You know, the usual way, John, would be you have your aides put everything together, the leaders step in at the end just to either confirm it or bridge the last divides. But the president was convinced in this case that Kim Jong-un was the only one who could really make a decision in North Korea, so he had to go negotiate the whole thing with him. And that's great if it works, but if it doesn't work, if you have a spectacular kind of collapse as they did today, there's no place to go. And I know they say they want to send their aides back to go do this again, but nobody's going to want to negotiate something that the President of the United States and the chairman of the North Korean Communist Party do not want to go ahead with. So that's the first takeaway. The second is that after saying that he would solve this problem, President Trump has just discovered why 3 previous presidents have failed to solve this problem. That to President Trump, it's inconceivable that somebody would want the bomb more than they would want to build some hotels along the beautiful beaches of North Korea. And if you're Kim Jong-un, you're thinking, if I give up the bomb, I'm just one step away from the Americans or their allies overthrowing me.
And Admiral Kirby, what happens next in the sense that in the past, both Kim Jong-un and his father, when they want leverage in the negotiations, when they think things have gone stale, they do something provocative. In Kim Jong-un's case, launch rockets and missiles. A big question for the United States is, do you now resume joint military exercises with South Korea, which are a critical part of keeping those troops ready just in case? What now?
Well, I hope the exercises go forward. I think we've canceled now or curtailed 9 of them. I think it's important for our readiness that we continue to do these exercises. I do think we need to look to see if Kim reacts in a military way, restarts missile launches, perhaps does more nuclear tests. We don't know how he's going to react. I do think one thing is for sure, though, that just because he wasn't testing, and he's claimed now he's not going to test in the future, doesn't mean he's not trying. Doesn't mean he isn't still producing fissile material. Doesn't mean he's not still developing missile technology and building more rockets. So he's going to continue to advance his program. And I think there's some estimates that he built even several more missiles in just the period between Singapore and Hanoi. So his program's going to continue, and the clock really, in my view, is on Kim's side, not ours.
That's one of the big problems, John, that I think that President Trump ran into here, which is that he didn't get a freeze on current production. I mean, President Obama got that as he was heading into negotiations with the Iranians. If you don't have a freeze, then time is on the side of your adversary, because the longer they drag out the negotiations, the bigger the problem and the bigger the arsenal get.
And once again, we saw from this president his willingness to take the side of the autocrat, if you will. Kim in this case, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and Vladimir Putin. Listen.
I don't believe that he would have allowed that to happen. It just wasn't to his advantage to allow that to happen. He tells me that he didn't know about it, and I will take him at his word. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to conclude that the Crown Prince did it. Whether he did or whether he didn't, he denies it vehemently. I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
What is it about this president, whether it's Otto Warmbier, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, Russian election interference, he takes the side of the dictator?
Yeah, he just didn't need to go there, John. You know, it was a question about human rights, and a fair question, and he said he brought it up, but he didn't need to say that. It was really inexplicable. I think it was, quite frankly, the low point of the press conference. I just don't understand why he needs to just take at face value the words of some of these autocrats. And look, it just strains credulity that Kim Jong-un had no awareness about what was going on with Otto Warmbier.
David Sanger, Admiral Kirby, appreciate your coverage throughout the summit. We'll see you when you get safely back home. Up next for us here, more fallout from Michael Cohen's testimony and new potential exposure for the star witness. Any days aimed, Democrats say, at curbing gun violence. The so-called Charleston loophole bill would extend the wait for gun purchasers from 3 days to 10 days. 3 Republicans crossed party lines to vote for it. The bill's backers say it will give the FBI more time to complete background checks and potentially stop some mentally ill or those with criminal records from buying a weapon. New Jersey Senator and Democratic presidential hopeful Cory Booker will be reintroducing a bill today pushing for the nationwide legalization of marijuana. Booker's bill would also wipe clean the records of people who have gotten in trouble for using or possessing marijuana. The pot issue is a big one for Senator Booker and many other presidential candidates. Senators Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Bernie Sanders, all co-sponsors of that legislation. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu set to be charged with bribery and fraud following 3 separate corruption investigations, according to a source with knowledge of the decision. Netanyahu calling the charges, quote, ridiculous. President Trump spoke to him this morning, asked about the charges before today's announcement.
I just think he's been a great prime minister, and I don't know about his difficulty, but you're telling me something that, people have been hearing about, but I don't know about that. I can say this, that he's done a great job as prime minister. He's tough, he's smart, he's strong.
And some breaking news this hour in the Republican reaction to Michael Cohen's testimony. CNN's Manu Raju live on Capitol Hill. Manu, what's happening?
Yeah, 2 of President Trump's closest allies, Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, who are the Republicans on the House Oversight Committee, just sent a letter to the Attorney General Bill Barr asking him to investigate possible perjury of Michael Cohen's testimony yesterday before the committee. They're laying out several areas of inconsistency and contradictions to what had been filed in federal court and in previous testimony. 2 of these regarding one regarding bank fraud. They write this: several times during his testimony, Mr. Cohen denied committing various fraudulent acts that he has pleaded guilty to in federal court. Specifically, Mr. Cohen said, "I never defrauded any bank." These denials are intentionally false. They also write that Mr. Cohen repeatedly testified that he did not seek employment in the White House following President Trump's election. This is demonstrably, materially, and intentionally false, and they say it's in direct conflict with court filings made by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. Now, on those charges, on the bank fraud situation, he didn't plead guilty to bank fraud, but to making false statements to a bank. He did acknowledge defaulting on one loan back in 2018, and also about whether he was pursuing a job in the White House. That's something that a lot of people, particularly Trump allies, have pushed back on. These 2 Republicans cite text messages that were seized by the Southern District of New York showing that he was seeking that position, but he has said that he disputes how that was characterized by the federal prosecutors. But nevertheless, of course, John, this is going to be a decision for the DOJ. Will Bill Barr investigate this? That's ultimately his decision. We'll see what they decide to do. John.
Bill Barr's second stint as Attorney General. He'll find this one is in a very new and different Washington. Manu Raju live on the Hill. Appreciate that. Up next for us, he set an end of February deadline to decide his own political future. So is Beto O'Rourke ready to enter the packed Democratic 2020 field? He just isn't quite ready to tell the rest of us.
You're excited to announce something soon. What is that?
I'm going to be making an announcement soon. I'm going to be making the same announcement to everyone at the same time.
Okay.
And that's all I can say at this time.
Are you running for president?
That's all I'm going to say.
Okay. When will you make that announcement?
Soon.
Can you define soon?
No, I can't.
Things that narrow
I
down?
can't. I'm sorry. I wish I could be more helpful to you, but that's all I'm prepared to say tonight.
Since the former Texas congressman isn't sharing, let's try a little process of elimination. A source tells CNN O'Rourke has ruled out another Texas Senate run in 2020. This time it would be against the Republican Senate Majority Whip, John Cornyn. Last night, Cornyn posting a little shade on Twitter, quote, looks like Schumer couldn't close the deal. That would be the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, who wanted Beto O'Rourke to run for Senate. So is that it? Do we just do process of elimination and say he's running for president? Or is Beto O'Rourke going to say, I'm going to sit on the sidelines in 2020?
I'm going by just what I saw there. It sounds like he's running for president. Why would you do that? I think.
Why would you smile that whimsical smile?
So I presume he's running, and it's probably why not, right? Yeah. He's got money. He's very popular. He's got high name ID. I think it is probably a disappointment, and you might know better than I, to the Senate Democrats that he would have been formidable running there.
And other Texas Democrats, as you jump in, I just want to show from the Dallas Morning News, Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson said this week on Lone Star Politics she recently texted O'Rourke, urged him to run for Senate. I would love for him to stay Texas focused. She said she told O'Rourke, who texted back, I love you, and I appreciate your friendship.
Democrats would love to win back the White House, but they would also love to win back the Senate.
Right.
And a Democratic president in 2021 is not going to be able to do much if the Republicans still control the Senate. And that's causing some complications, some recruiting troubles for Senator Schumer right now. I mean, Steve Bullock in Montana obviously looks like he has eyes more on the presidency than challenging Steve Daines Hickenlooper in Colorado against Cory Gardner, and this one as well. So Schumer's going to have a little bit more work to do to recruit the top tier candidates for these really competitive Senate races.
And if you're Beto O'Rourke, you lost to Ted Cruz, but you raised a boatload of money. You got a national profile in the process. The Quinnipiac poll today gives you a little puffy chest moment, if you will, if you believe early polls. And I would caution all of you at home watching, do not believe early polls. One more time. Do not
show them anyway.
Do not believe early polls. But this is in Quinnipiac in Texas. Trump-Biden, 47-46. Trump-Sanders, 47-45. Trump-O'Rourke, 47-46. And we've seen O'Rourke in the top 3 or 4 when you look at national polls in the Democratic presidential race as well. Again, ask Governor Gillum in Florida and Governor Abrams in Georgia and Senator O'Rourke from Texas. The early polls, when you get closer to an election, things can be different in your state. But that's the thing to say, hey, I'm with, never mind that it's Texas, unlikely to go blue next year.